Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out this morning on this brisk morning. We're honored today to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Robert Smith. Many of you may recognize Dr. Smith as he has graciously joined us for several years as our featured November speaker, recognition of our military veterans and active duty service members Appreciation Day. Dr. Smith recently retired as director of the Fort Riley Museum Complex. He's a Nebraska native. He earned his undergraduate degree in history from the University of Nebraska. Inspired by his lifelong passion for history, especially military history, a field very close to his heart. He comes from a proud military family. His father was a World War II vet and a career Air Force senior NCO. Before returning to academia, Dr. Smith managed a family business where he developed strong leadership and organizational skills. He went on to attend Kansas State University, earning his Master's in Arts in Military History in 2004 and his PhD in Military History in 2008. Dr. Smith is a co-author of a book on the history of Fort Riley and has written numerous articles on military subjects. Today he will share with us a fascinating story of Lieutenant Colonel Dwight D. Eisenhower's 1919 Transcontinental military convoy, a journey that helped shape the future of America's highways and national defense. Please join me in giving Dr. Smith a warm welcome.
Thank you, Doug. Okay. Anyway, just a little background here. I'm a roamer when I talk, so that's my tick for doing. But about a month and a half ago, I was out at the Eisenhower Museum and Library doing a talk about veterans out there. And I know a bunch of people out there because we museum people, we get around. We're eccentric, but we get around. Anyway, talking to a couple of the folks out there, and I said, I'm going to do for the car program, do you have anything on Eisenhower's Cadillac, and talk about the militarization of commercial vehicles? And they said, we have a little bit, but why don't you do one on the 1919? We've got loads of information on that. And I said, that's a great idea. That was a great idea. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, the government shut down and the museum closed. So I had to rely on a number of items online, magazine articles, thank you, Lowell, and some of the books I have on Eisenhower. Interestingly enough, the Ambrose book, which is supposed to be the definitive book on Eisenhower, actually devotes one sentence to this, and this had a significant impact on Eisenhower later in life. So, without further ado, let's get rolling. Okay, 1956. Anybody ride down I-70 and just outside of Topeka, you see this brown sign? Have you ever noticed that brown sign? And I thought, let's put that up here because at 56, Eisenhower signed the Federal Highway Act, and it was instituting the interstate highway system. 1956 construction began, August. High speed, what does that mean? That means high-speed road network throughout the continental United States. 1958, the first segment, that 8 miles outside of Topeka, Kansas, is opened. Now, Pennsylvania says, no, we're the first because they created the Lincoln Highway and they had high speed, but that was before the fact. And so we still have that honor. What's really interesting that I thought is not that many years ago, on October 27, 1992, the last section of the interstate opened at Glenwood Canyon, Colorado. So I started to think about what happened at Glenwood Canyon that it took so long. And then I found out most of the interstate is tunnels, that they had to bore tunnels through there. So that's the reason for that. Anyway, in the contiguous United States, continental United States, 48 states, and Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, we have 48,890 miles of interstate highway now. Why did Eisenhower decide? Well, there were two significant events in his life that got him to think about the interstate highway system. And those significant events were first in 1919, he went on this 1919 cross-country convoy. He said it would be a lot of fun. Well, it was fun, but he says this is where the work begins. And the second is, during the Second World War, he noticed that the German Autobahn, created by Adolf Hitler, facilitated the movement of troops and logistics. And this is a very famous picture here at very close to the close of World War II, with American vehicles heading one way down the Autobahn, and German prisoners heading the other way. And so these two events impacted his life and made a great impression on him on creating the interstate highway. Actually, and I always hate to do this, but I'm going to read this anyway, Ike took note of this and actually said, a third of a century later, after seeing the Autobahns of modern Germany and knowing the asset those highways were to the Germans, I decided as president to put an emphasis on the kind of road building. When we finally secured the necessary congressional approval, we started and he was a bit off, 41,000 miles of superhighways. It's now 42,800 that are already proving their worth. This is one of the things that I felt deeply about, and I made a personal and absolute decision to see that the nation would benefit by it. The old Convoy had started me thinking about good two-lane highways, but Germany had made me see the wisdom of broader ribbons across the land. And this is Dwight D. Eisenhower that said this. So, how did this 1919 event come about? It was a publicity stunt. It was a publicity stunt because at the conclusion of World War I, the United States Army wanted to still remain relevant with the American public. The problem is whenever the United States enters a global conflict like World War I or World War II, we have these massive mobilizations, millions of men, and as soon as the conflict ends, we demobilize and we cut funding to the military. So basically, in 1919, at the conclusion of World War I, it was decided that Captain Bernard McMahon would basically advocate for an Army motor convoy from coast to coast. Proponents of this I thought was super interesting. Proponents of the stunt, Firestone Tires says, oh, we're ready for it. We will also sponsor it. And I started to think about Portland Cement Company. That one takes a minute to think about. But then you think about all the cement going into an interstate highway. And so they were on board. And then the Lincoln Highway Association. So the plan was, in order to get it through government paperwork, we're going to test military vehicles in and transport across the nation and sort of signify its military ability. So the War Department accepted the plan. Commanding officer was a Lieutenant Colonel Charles McClure, this guy right here, and there were 23 officers. Lieutenant Colonel Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower was an observer. And the most interesting thing is he's the observer for the Tank Corps here. There were 258 enlisted, 14 War Department observation officers. And what's really interesting is those observation officers because they were members of the Air Service, the Coast and Field Artillery, Medical Corps, Ordnance, Signal Corps, and Tank Corps. And they were going to take 2 war-strength, complete truck companies with them. This is Dwight D. Eisenhower as Lieutenant Colonel, the Tank Corps. By the way, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and you'll see that here in a few minutes, but as a member of the Tank Corps, they're going to haul a tank with them. Lots of luck, given what you're going to see here shortly. Okay, so I know this is a car museum, so I thought everybody'd be interested, and I really dug into this as far as I could to see what type of vehicles were involved here. And there were 80 vehicles involved, 34 heavy cargo trucks, and they transported the large quantities of goods. And then there were four light delivery trucks for smaller cargo, 2 mobile machine shops, which they're going to need periodically through this trip, 1 reconnaissance car for scouting and surveillance, 2 staff observation cars for transporting personnel and equipment, 5 GMC ambulances, 5 motorcycles with sidecars. Now, if you'll notice this list here, we have a reconnaissance car for scouting and surveillance, but the 5 motorcycles with sidecars were the actual scouting vehicles. They would actually plow ahead, even a day ahead of the convoy, to scout the best routes. They had 4 motorcycles for scouting, single occupant motorcycles, 2 mobile machine shops for repairs, 1 mobile blacksmith shop, 1 record truck, 1 Militor wheeled tractor. And this is the closest I could find to a Militor wheeled tractor. There were 2 water tanks, 1 gasoline tank, 2 spare parts stores, and 1 small 2-man tank on a trailer. And then the convoy also included reconnaissance cars and staff observation cars. And what's really interesting is when you look at the documents that are out there, no one can actually determine the precise number of vehicles on this convoy. What we do know is the convoy was around 2 miles in length. Vehicle composition. Okay, what type of vehicles were there? Well, Dodge, Garford, and Cadillac passenger cars. Willis Overland Car Company, and what's really interesting is I had to correct this because the Willis Overland Car Company said, we donated 3 cars for it. That was a myth. That was used in their advertising that they had actually sent their cars, their Willis cars, on this. Packard, White, GMC, and FWD and Mack trucks. Anybody have an idea what FWD trucks are? That's right, they're 4-wheel drive. A Militor military tractor, GMC ambulances, Harley and Indian motorcycles, and then the Renault light tank on a trailer. So these are the vehicles. This is the Garford Company's automobile advertisement for 1920, so just 1 year afterwards. It was called the Cyclops because it had the headlight right above the radiator. Okay, so what's the route? Okay, well, the route, it began on July 7th, 1919. It's a 2-mile convoy, and they left 0 milestone on the ellipse in Washington, D.C., right outside the White House. They headed to Pennsylvania, where they picked up the highway at Gettysburg. And the Lincoln Highway was actually considered the national highway. One of the major problems is that the soldiers that they had for the Motor Transport Corps, the ones that were going to be driving the vehicles, had very little driving experience. So the problem is that they're going to have some issues here, and you're going to see some really interesting photographs. Average daily speed. Now, what I want you to do, it's probably highly illegal, but I want you to get on the interstate when you're heading home here on I-70 and drive 15 to 25 miles an hour and see how that is. But that was their average speed. East of the Mississippi, way east of the Mississippi, driving was easy. Most of them were hard surface roads. However, when they got to Illinois, it's like they fell off the map. Most of the roads were sand, gravel. And one of the comments I read when Eisenhower got to Omaha, Nebraska, because they're taking a route very similar to the I-80 interstate, Eisenhower said, "We're at the end of the world. There's roads, they don't know what they are." Okay, so most of the roads past Omaha are nothing more than tracts of sand, clay, and gravel. The Army's publicity, this was the reason for this convoy. It was an exercise in seeing the endurance of the vehicles, also the situation of the roads in the United States, but it was also a big publicity stunt. And what would happen is those guys on those motorcycles would head a day ahead and stop in every town and say, "We're coming," and to see the turnout. And so they would be scouted, and basically, ostensibly, it was to find the best routes to be traveled. But this was also a very big publicity stunt to let the United States citizens see what the Army was doing. 6 days into the exercise, they just happened to stop at Harvey Firestone's farmstead. And they were given, as Eisenhower said, a fine chicken dinner. And they dined with local officials. I was thinking of Lowell May when I read what it was. Lowell, it was only the officers that were invited to Harvey Firestone's dinner. The enlisted men, they stayed back in their tents. Okay. Hospital Americans along the way offered them melon fests and lemonade. And when they arrived in San Francisco, they were greeted by a horse-mounted, talk about an anachronism here, a horse-mounted police parade with Air Corps and Navy aircraft flying above them, showering them with flowers. This is, by the way, I want to point out, all of these notes in these photographs are Ike's handwriting, notating the photograph. This one says, "Lemonade gratis." And they're having lemonade along the way. Much of the journey, I said, was I-80. And then when they hit Illinois, there were wagon wheel tracks, mountain trails, and desert sands all the way to California. And they had to contend with mud and quicksand. Frequently, the bridges were too narrow and too weak to take the convoy, and they would have to stop after they had crossed or damaged the bridge and repair the bridge and put it back into serviceable shape. They averaged about 58 miles a day. That's a good day. During the trip, Eisenhower had many stops because he had relation. They stopped in Iowa, in Boone, Iowa, where he was met by his wife's aunt and uncle. And then he met up with Mamie in North Platte, Nebraska. And at Salt Lake City, half the town turned out for a dinner and a dance. This is courtesy of the Eisenhower Museum. So it arrived in San Francisco. It took 62 days. And the route it followed was basically roughly what I-80 takes today, except when it gets to Nevada, where it kind of jogs off to the south. So, in the military, and my training to talk to leadership and things, lecturing to them, we always did an after-action review. And so there were a couple of things that I'd found out. First of all, some equipment was better than others. This was needed to be rectified. So the Garford truck's performance was highly criticized. They did not like the heavy trucks. The Packard trucks received high praise, and their carrying capacity they marked as remarkable. The Dodge and Cadillac touring cars held up well. The repair, engineer, medical units were deemed well-trained. Eisenhower, though, had some comments about the MTC, the Motor Transport Corps, and those soldiers needed significant additional training. And he said that the discipline among the MTC was conspicuous by his absence, and he did not elaborate. So you can just think about that. He also said that the MTC officers and men were inexperienced. They were guilty. Now I'm thinking 15 to 25 miles an hour of excessive speed, poor vehicle handling, and unseemly conduct is how he had put it. So what's really interesting is that, and what we don't realize is back in the 19-teens, this was just a few decades after horsepower, having horses, and having the ability and the experience of being able to drive a vehicle. And so the soldiers had an issue that. They had an issue of, and they should have seen that in World War I, and now they see it on this cross country that the people are just, that they have in the MTC are inexperienced in driving. So to me, it would be very much analogous to taking your 12 or 13-year-old out in your car and letting them drive. The cost and effect of this trip, well, they traveled 3,250 miles. It took 3 months, or if you want to be exact, it's 62 days to complete. Departed Washington on July 7th and arrived in San Francisco on September 6th. There were 230 road incidents. So, yeah, probably a couple each day. 21 soldiers were injured. The convoy broke and repaired 88 wooden bridges. All the roads from Illinois to Nevada were unpaved. So there were sand tracks, gravel tracks, just wagon tracks. The main objectives for the Army, they were pretty much fulfilled for this. First of all, Congress had to sit up and take note that maybe we need some highways, some paved highways past the Mississippi River. The second thing is it proved to the United States Army, and this is a time when most armies were still using horse-drawn transport, the viability and necessity of having internal combustion vehicles, motor transport for the Army. It also was a good proving ground to test out different vehicles. As he said, the Garford was not really an acceptable built vehicle for the United States Army to purchase those. Also wanted to see how the vehicles stood up, the standard vehicles stood up to just all types of terrain. And I want to assure you that all types of terrain were encountered on this convoy. It was determined, and this surprised me, that the light trucks were far superior to the heavy trucks used for off-road duties. And this carries over to the Second World War, where you have the deuce and a half truck that actually becomes the mainstay of the United States Army. The publicity stunt rousing success. 3 million people, an estimated 3 million people turned out to see the convoy as it headed west. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. I hope you enjoyed this. As a historian, if we don't know the answer, we're going to make something up, and we're going to sound like we know what we're talking about. So please, if you have any questions about it. Yes, sir?
How many vehicles were just lost?
How many vehicles? That's a great question. I think they were able to take all of them. Did you notice the one video where they were towing like 3 trucks? Mm-hmm. And so they were. Those heavy-duty trucks, those Moatar trucks from World War I that the Army had used in World War I, really, Eisenhower said they could really pull. And you also had the tractor there. So I want to know how the tank made it through. It was on a flatbed the whole way because they said no tracked vehicles would be used on this. It would be only wheeled vehicles. Yes, sir.
When they had the pictures of the vehicles that were stuck in the mud, do you know if there were any days where they canceled any kind of transport, saying weather not permitting?
There were many of those days where they just stopped and they said, we've got to dig this thing out. You see the one that was tipped over, and they actually tipped it back over. And there's if you're more interested in this, I only did the 2.5-minute video from the Eisenhower. There is a 24-minute documentary on the internet, which has really got some really wild scenes of what they're going through. Yes, ma'am.
3 million saw the convoy. What would have been the population of the United States back then? Yes.
1919, the guess. I can tell you how many soldiers were in World War I. We're going to check that out. Yes, sir.
It's my understanding that the federal government had not participated in any kind of highway construction until after this.
That's correct. That's correct.
And it was 1926, which we're coming up on the 100th anniversary, before we got a numbered highway system.
That's right. And I did not know that, but the numbered highway system, the mile marker, in doing the research for this, that the mile markers start in the west on the interstate system and work east.
Yeah, the other direction on the two-way system.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and same from north to south. Two-way highways, when they first started paving them and they put the number system in 1926, you start with 1 on the east coast and it's 101 on the west coast. But it's interstate is 5 on the west coast and it's 95 on the west coast. And north-south is the same way, it's reversed. So at the interstate, they flip-flop the number system.
They did, and do you know the north-south, they add an extra number. Like if you're in Kansas City and you're on 35, it's now 435.
Those are bypass, those are and it's short-length additions to the interstate.
Now, what you probably don't realize, that I hadn't realized, is that today, when in the 1950s, when Eisenhower was bringing this to the forefront, that a lot of localities were against putting the interstate highway near them because they thought that that would start to affect their business and their population.
And it is.
Absolutely.
Bypass so many towns that you just don't see them because you're going down the interstate.
That's right. Living here in Manhattan, always coming out of Topeka, and I'd asked one day, why isn't Topeka on the signs, on the how many miles? Manhattan. And you have a little sign, 46, and that's because it's off of the interstate. It's 10 miles off the interstate. So really kind of interesting. The other interesting thing is it did take about 1.5 years for Congress to appropriate the funds before Eisenhower suggested it. Yes, sir.
Did they have any fuel trucks that went with them?
Yes, they did. They had one tanker truck, a fuel truck, and they filled up from that. Yes, because there weren't many gas stations along the route.
And that many vehicles would probably deplete gas at a gas station pretty quick.
Well, it's what's really interesting. And this was from another program I had done a couple of years ago. When you look at right before the Second World War, it's 1 out of every 5 Americans own a car in the United States. And when you go to Germany, it's like 1 out of every 50 people. And when you get to Great Britain, it's even worse than that. I think it's about 1 out of every 70 people. So we become, in the 20s and the 30s, we become a very mobile society very quickly. Yes, ma'am.
So, how much gas do you think they use?
I would imagine quite a bit, but they would have, those scout systems would also head into localities where they could fill the tank truck, so they would keep themselves self-sufficient for the trip. Yes, ma'am.
Since they had to stop so often, maybe out in the middle of nowhere, did they bring a food truck and building supplies?
They had supplies on some of those on those vehicles. Yes, they took their army rations with them because there's actually a video where the enlisted guys don't get to go to Harvey Firestone's fine chicken dinner, and you see all the tents and you see a cook wagon there working. So, yes, sir.
I was 9 years old when they built the interstate between, the first section of interstate. And it followed old Kansas Highway 10. So when we go to Topeka, you could still drive Highway 10, but they were building the interstate right beside it in most places. And I know they worked at least 7 days a week. Now, whether they worked 24 hours a day, I don't remember. But I know when you would get down to where they were going through the hills, they were blasting, even on Sundays. And we were going down there one time, and they let go of a blast, and there was a Cadillac full of people in front of us, and they stopped and got out, and they all looked at their tires. And
I can remember, though, that many years ago, my dad was at Offutt Air Force Base, and my family, mother and father, came from St. Louis, so every summer we would take a trip. And I can remember the single-lane highways while they were building the interstate, I-80 along there. So it was kind of interesting. Kind of makes me feel old, though.
I think I-80 now is probably the most traveled interstate east and west.
I think so. And watch out for those Nebraska State Troopers.
Yeah, and the semis.
Well, the one thing, good, now you got me on a tangent here, but the one thing I really like about the Nebraska Interstate 80 is there are truck lanes and that you can zip around. I wish Kansas would pick that up, so you don't have to pass all the trucks. Yeah, Lowell.
Several years ago, I think, I think it was 2009, the Military Vehicle Preservation Association did a repeat of this Transcontinental Convoy with members' vehicles. And it took them, I think it was 35 days.
Oh, they had it easy.
They, all the vehicles were privately owned, and they had deuce and a halves and Jeeps and scout cars and all this kind of thing. And they had 5 days where they just rested and repaired vehicles. So, and they do a convoy someplace every year. They did a Route 66 convoy a couple of years ago.
You gonna head out on that, Lowell? Oh, okay. Well, I thought I'd end up, though, with the questions and just these motor transport ads from the time period. These are from 1919, and this one I like. Say, young fellow, do you want to be a mechanic? The Motor Transport Corps will train you. And they really did need some training. So, well, thank you so much. I hope you found it interesting. I had a lot of fun going through and looking at the documents, and I am going to get to the Eisenhower. Oh.
104
million? 104 million then. So we had 3 million. So quite a, very respectable number. Well, thanks, and I'll turn it over to Doug.
Thank you.